as well as ambassador to the Organization of American States. In the earlier era of the dictatorship, between 1973 and 1990, he was a very important leader in the Socialist Party of Chile, was one of the leaders in the making of a party that came to be called the Party for Democracy, which was very important in the organization for the plebiscite in 1988 that brought down Pinochet as president of the country. Now, he's given us two books. One is A Solitary War on the Iraq War, that appeared in April 2008, and The Dictator's Shadow, Life Under Augusto Pinochet, also published in 2008. And I want to tell you a little bit about, just make a couple of remarks about these books which I've read. The Dictator's Shadow, and I believe the copies are over there on the table, and I hope some of you will buy them, is, first of all, let me tell you about him as a writer. It is suspenseful. It is a page-turning memoir that sometimes reads like a mystery thriller. I'm not going to give it all away, and I'm not sure what Ambassador Muñoz is going to talk about what he'll share with you, but I'll alert you to the scenes that have to do with dynamite during the outset of the finale of the Allende period and outset of the Pinochet period, if you will, and also a chapter about the attempted assassination of Pinochet in 1986 that really could be turned into a movie. But beyond that, it's an inside account of how Chileans lived under and resisted the Pinochet dictatorship, and an account of the ups and downs of Chile and Pinochet after the transition to democracy in 1990, when he continued to cast a very long shadow, hence the title of the book. For me, among the most revealing aspects had to do with the 1980s. It had to do with Muñoz's first-person account of negotiations between socialists, communists, and Christian Democrats in 1987, after the failed attempted assassination of Pinochet, about what was at the time a very polemical issue, whether Chileans could really bring down Pinochet by defeating him in a 1988 plebiscite originally designed to prolong the dictator's rule. The outcomes at the time were highly uncertain, and opposition meetings were still risky underground affairs. Now, what about the other book, A Solitary War, which I also would urge you to read? From his vantage point as head of the Security Council in January of 2004 and chair of the Security Council's Al-Qaeda and Taliban Sanctions Committee, as an official of the Ricardo Lagos administration, Ambassador Muñoz had an inside view of the politics of war, of the ways the Bush administration moved toward a kind of go-it-alone, not kind of, a go-it-alone approach in the ideologically impassioned run-up to the Iraq War that was launched in March of 2003. And he gives us an inside account of the tensions that run-up caused with Chile, Mexico, and other countries on the Security Council, including France and Russia. And eventually, interestingly, the ways the Bush administration itself came to realize that unilateralism imposed a price and that perhaps it would have to readjust. Now, I don't want to steal his thunder, so I won't say much more, except to add that his book is informed by many fascinating personal aspects, including a long-standing acquaintance, at least, or perhaps friendship with Condoleezza Rice from graduate student times at the University of Denver. Ambassador Muñoz, like many people who were repressed under the dictatorship, got what some people called a Pinochet scholarship and had to roam around different parts of the world to study. The accounts of conversations between President Bush and President Lagos are highly revealing, I think, of President Bush's approach to international relations on the one hand, and on the other, the values of multilateralism and international law held by nations for whom the values of rule of law and international norms of human rights were not empty stock phrases, precisely because their peoples had lived through times when laws and human rights protections had been set aside and rendered substantively marginal. So, my friends and colleagues, without further ado, I'd like to give to you a very impressive witness of our times, Ambassador and author Heraldo Muñoz.
Gay and Professor Stern, thank you very much for that introduction. And thanks for having invited me to University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've heard so much about this fine university. It was about time for me to have come on an occasion which I should, I suppose, speak about both books, but I like to concentrate on the one that is closest to my heart, which is the one about Chile, and tell you the story about it. Because interestingly enough, this is a book I never intended to write. I had finished being a member of the Security Council, and I had to get off my chest the book about the experience in the Security Council in the run-up to the war and then afterwards. So I wrote a manuscript about Iraq and the Security Council, the one that Steve has mentioned, the Solitary War. And I went around in New York trying to have it published in a commercial press. And I had my first lesson in marketing, and that is you never approach a publishing house directly. The first thing you have to do is to have a literary agent. Unless you want to do an academic work, but if you want to do a commercial piece, you have to have an agent. So I had burned already several big houses by sending my manuscript and getting a lot of very nice, polite replies saying that you write very well. It's very interesting, but there's too much written about Iraq. Basically, that was the message. So then somebody says, no, you have to have an agent. I got an agent interested in my book, and he got me 2 appointments. One was the head of an editorial house who wanted me to write a book about the future of international relations. And I said, but my book is about Iraq. You know, I want to publish this book about Iraq. He said, no, we want you to write. And I said, well, maybe in 5 years, I'll contact you again. The other one invited me to lunch, and I thought it was really promising. Because if they invite you to lunch, there's something there. And he was the executive vice president of Basic Books. And he says, look, your manuscript about Iraq is fascinating, but I want to propose that you write a book about Pinochet and the military dictatorship in Chile. And I said, but my book is about Iraq. And it's not about Pinochet and about the Chilean experience. I'm not a historian, I'm not a biographer, so you got the wrong person. He said, no, you probably got it wrong, because we want you to write a book about you, your own perspective, because your CV is fascinating, the things that you have done in your life. So we want you to write about how it was to have been in underground against Pinochet and how would have been fighting the dictatorship, and this individual that had so much to say about the world and about our times, this dictator who became the model for the Washington Consensus, who was arrested in London, changing international law, who became such a brutal dictator that he created, in essence, indirectly, the international solidarity movement and human rights networks throughout the world. The individual who was linked to such figures as Nixon, Kissinger, Milton Friedman, Fidel Castro, Leonid Brezhnev, and so many other figures of our times, whether he liked it or not, whether he was an object of the policies or whether he was associated with these individuals. So I said no, and he insisted for several weeks until I gave up, and I said, well, maybe I will do this. But it was a page of my life that I had already turned. Interestingly enough, about that time, a publisher came up and my Iraq book was finally published.